everyone. Okay, okay, we're live. Brian, thanks for joining me from Liberal Mecca, Portland. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well today. How about yourself?
Doing all right. Thanks for asking. We're in the Radical Mountains of Colorado. So yeah, let's do this. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the Amazing Brains channel. I am here today with one of our partners and dear friend of mine, BT from Portland. He's actually helping us open an office there that'll be not just neurotherapy, but also working with psychedelics. And one of the things I'm beyond that being just killer, another part of really excited to share some time with him and to be partnering is his love and experience for wilderness, nature connection, and those adventures. He and I actually met on a 20-foot longboat with 10 people for a week. So
2021, 22, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember the name?
No, I do not. Do you?
Wasn't it like the Resolution?
Let's go with strong yes. Yeah, that rings a bell. So yeah, we spent some time mostly rowing through the San Juans because there was not a lot of wind, and you can see his handsome beard, but what you don't know is he is about 6'7". So it's a pretty fun guy to share a 21-foot boat with, that's for sure. So
yeah. And we slept on the boat. That's the crazy thing. Being on the boat is one thing. Sleeping on it with 9 other people.
Yeah. So for people that are having a hard time imagining that, we would take our oars out, and then you would put your oars kind of what would you call that? Parallel to the boat, but on the boat, kind of on the
we'd create like another deck.
Yeah, basically. So some people would sleep under the oars, and then you on life jackets or a sleeping pad, and then some people would sleep on top of the oars, and you would pull this canvas tent, so you almost make this wall tent on a boat, and we'd basically anchor in the ocean or the San Juans. So and then we'd take the line to shore, and we do a round turn 2 half hitches to make sure it didn't float away in the middle of the night. And as a wilderness guide training for a company that's since gone out of business, but kind of solidified our relationship, and that love for both helping people feel better, recover from challenges, to help them perform, and also do it in a way that's fun and gets people engaged in nature. And I think I really missed that part of my life. And I know you've more recently worked at the Trackers PDX. What do they call that?
Yeah, that's right.
So do you want to chat a little bit what was that experience like? What were you doing in the woods and
it was we had programs for children and adults, but it was a big, in the summertime when school's out, it would be kind of like a alternative summer camp for kids. And my role specifically was I was in the Rangers Guild, and even subgenre of that was archery. So I taught archery to kids, and with that, because we operated in the woods, there was also like tracking of animals, plant identification, kind of survival skills or bushcraft. So friction fires, debris shelters, things like that, and then also some bow making and general outdoor skills. Depending on the age group, that pretty much determined how deep you get in. And mostly it was pretty much just getting kids outside in the woods and trying to build that connection to their surroundings and the history of the land, and hopefully have them come away with an affinity for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's key. I think, I don't know if many people know this, but I actually got my master's degree in wilderness therapy. And I think I have obviously, as you do as well, a strong bias towards nature as a connecting experience that I think, this channel being more geared towards people for performance, there's so much benefit to just spending intimate time with nature. And I kind of use that word intentionally, right? Because a lot of the times I spent in the woods was mountain biking, rock climbing, skiing, which is, depending on how you do it, can be very connected. Like if you're backcountry skiing and paying deep attention to what aspect of the mountain you're on, what's the snow layering doing, what's the weather doing, is there wind loading, is there rapid heating, these different risk factors. But for the most part, when I was skiing in bounds or just riding my bike, I was fairly not noticing and not very curious. And I think the more intimate stuff, which I think you guys really, you had a lot of experience facilitating, really is the more curiosity and interacting with nature, not just playing in nature. Is that a fair way to think about that for you as well? Or
Yeah, I would agree with that. And what's wild too is, a lot of the, like, I'm definitely the person who goes on a hike with friends and gets frustrated that people just want to like get to the end of the trail as like efficiently as possible, and I'm the one that's like, well, I think there might be some mushrooms behind that log. I'm going to slow down and go over there and check it out, or like, what's that over there? But
yeah,
it, like, so much of the research, the latest research, is just like shows that it doesn't matter however one engages with nature, as long as you're out there. It's just like, just being outside for 20 minutes a day can have profound impacts on someone. And
100%.
it's like, whatever you want to get out of it, it's fine. I used to kind of like not rag on them, but just like, oh, those trail runners, like they're missing so much. They're not paying attention. They don't see that, like, you know, um, that broken branch is like a deer trail or whatever. Aren't paying attention to what's around them, but it's just shown that like it kind of doesn't matter. Like, they're still out and engaging, and everyone who finds that benefit from nature is an ally of nature, even though we go in there for different purposes. And it helps so much with just mental, like you were saying, like, and even in our training, uh when the longboat, is that like so much stuff disappears. Like, if you're mountain biking, you're going down a trail, you're probably not thinking about, like, the cover sheet on the TPS reports, or oh, you didn't get a chance to sweep your house, or whatever it is, because it just nukes all of those like anxieties that just find a way of creeping in, and it lets you like really focus, and changes like your thought process and brain pattern.
100%. And I mean, as one of my favorite topics is flow, and getting into those flow states. I think I'd almost wonder if what matters is getting into that connected state, right? So if you're a trail runner, we call it exercise induced hypofrontality, which is basically an exercise induced flow state. You
Sure.
reduce some activity in the frontal lobes, like your sense of self, effort, and time. And that's where that like dissolving can come in. But other people are going to find access to that. It's like you said, like getting really curious and looking for mushrooms, or looking at like, oh, what, is this okay, there's these plants around, there's this trail. I wonder when these animals come through and what animals are coming through, what's their source of food, water, safety, these different ways to look at it. And then I wonder what it would be like to see them. And that can be its own unique exploration. And one thing I'll say is I actually pinched a nerve in my back right before going to Mexico last 2 weeks ago. So I wasn't able to surf, and which honestly with a 2-year-old is awesome, because then you just end up like doing sandcastle time, and like,
Right.
I feel like an adult trip would have been way worse, but I just hung out with my daughter and had a phenomenal time, even though I was hurting. And in my younger years, when I was so oriented to how fast or big or many times I could flip or spin, um, it was very oriented only towards the, say, trail running, adventure, adrenaline, gravity,
Yeah.
feds piece. And as I've gotten older and gone through different cycles of injury, or just different cycles of risk tolerance, I found that, I can actually access a really similar state through curiosity and like what you were talking about. And it really kind of comes like the way I more have started to think of these things. And we could even really throw psychedelics into this, and we could throw music and dance and play and sex and all the fun stuff, and even really work and performance, right? It's just another way to enter that altered flow state, right? And
Mhm.
that's what gives so much benefit. But when you layer nature on top of that, right, to your point of like, hey, just being out there for 20 minutes. And I did a presentation in school, and I think they even looked at seeing benefits from having a picture of a tree in a roomless or a windowless room, right? So even just having a picture of nature is going to have some physiological, like there's heart rate, cholesterol, cortisol, brainwave studies. There's so many studies showing that reduction. So
yeah, and I feel like you kind of touched on it, but a lot of that is like, and I'm curious because I don't know too much about like the brain chemistry with flow state, or at least I don't know as much as you do, but like one of the things that popped into my mind when you were talking about your time in Mexico, and something that I would always try and create the environment that would be conducive for it with the groups I was leading is just, I mean, it was easy with kids, but working with adults, it changes because like, you get into that, like, I'm a healthy athletic adult, so I'm going to like just charge down the mountain. But something that I really think is important is figuring out how to make our brain, like a lot of people would call it the childlike mind, where, because I almost guarantee when you and your daughter were building sandcastles, I don't think, you were thinking like, I don't think she was talking about or thinking about much other than that sandcastle. Like that was the focus, and that was like, this is it right now. And it was peak experience, and just like figuring out that like, you've seen a tree, you've seen a million, even though we both know that's not true, but like we take for granted that stuff that might create wonderment in a child, and figuring out how to access that childlike mind is another huge factor, I think, that plays in, like the paperclip quiz of like how many pages can fit in a paperclip. Where a child might say, well, how big is the paperclip? Is it a 20-foot tall paperclip? That's a lot of paper, and most adults wouldn't even go there. They would be like, I don't know, about 100.
Because they 12, so you got maybe.
Well, yeah, I don't even. Yeah, it's like, I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
Who
I mean,
knows? Probably not 100. 100 sheets is a lot.
No, I mean, to your point, maybe it's a 2-inch thick paperclip. What's a ream of paper? 500. I think you're getting into this like facet of creativity and divergent thinking, and I think, yeah, to your point, it's really easy to get sucked in when you're like, oh man, like, yeah, you're just like, you're not thinking about the end result. And you brought this about and this is actually I was getting acupuncture yesterday, and the guy has a Taoist proverb on his wall that's like, the destination isn't the point, like the gift is in the journey, is the butchering it a little bit here, but getting into that essence. And I think that when we think about performance at a really high level, and I mean this in like across the board, right? From like creative problem solving on a high corporate scale, or athletics, or even just you're having a hard time and something's annoying you, or you're maybe just, oh man, I thought this was going to happen. I just got a flat tire and I don't know how to change it. Right. There's so many ways in which stepping out of that like kind of fixed singular mindset into that growth divergent thinking of like, okay, well, I can sit here and be angry, and it's okay to be frustrated or have grief or want more ease in my life. However, that's not going to help this tire get changed or this problem get solved. I need to like step back, understand my resources, understand my time frame, figure out what I need to do in this situation and address that. And I think that what nature and what flow and what kind of mastering your physiology, if you will, provides us is that ability to step out of the like crisis frustrated moment, kind of self-connect and regulate. And often what these running flow nature connected activities, like it could be knitting for some person on here is probably like, yeah, it's knitting for me. And some person on here is probably like, dude, it's base jumping out of helicopters into sharks, and like both are fine, right? They just have different risk profiles, but you can still enter that same state. And I think what I've learned is that you have to go through that kind of challenge, friction, struggle, the wobble. It has a lot of different names, but you have to think and put some energy into whatever you're trying to solve, but then actually giving yourself permission and trusting the process, that's stepping away and allowing your brain to what we actually know is it slows down So we're actually using less of our frontal lobes. We're using less of this modern computing process in our brain. And we're actually, whoa, we're actually going slower, which is really counter to the kind of what I'd call the nervous system or culture of our society. You think about like Starbucks as a manifestation of this. Like we have a sleep deprived, heavily worked group, and caffeine has been an amazing stimulant and enhance cognitive abilities, but it's a psychoactive substance that people are using sometimes for kind of a nootropic performance enhancing piece. And sometimes we're just using it as a crutch because we don't get enough sleep and we're in a toxic cycle of just burnout. You know, so I think all of this and like trusting those processes and like really getting into the curiosity of it is where you get some really cool stuff. And especially where so many markets for kind of the entrepreneur are really crowded and busy. Like, well, how am I ever going to compete against like, you know, Blackstone? Like they have all the money in the world. You're like, well, you're probably not. Like if that's the game you're trying to play. But if you write your own story, if you find what's like authentic to yourself and come up with a creative solution, you'll probably get your needs met. Like you'll probably meet that goal. Most likely won't look like the linear path we're fantasizing it looks like. But I think that to me, and trusting that process as really from like a kid all the way up through an adult, and really kids are such a great teacher of that, right? Like that's such the innocence that we hope to preserve. And I mean, I know you're a father as well, and there's this tension I feel. Like we watched The Simpsons last night, like the episode 1 of The Simpsons. It's on Disney Plus, and honestly, like way darker than I remember it. Like that, like, you know, like Homer's like trying to commit suicide on like episode 2. You're like, whoa, like this had some depth in it. Yeah, and you know, I think that we're trying to cultivate in a child in the same way we'd be trying to cultivate in ourselves. Like I want her to understand technology. I want her not to be addicted to it. I want her to be connected to nature, but not having a crutch for it. Like there's this dynamic for all of us as we look at like the supplements we take or the routines we have that really support us to be the people we want to be, but also we can become over reliant on them. And I think that kind of flexibility and mobility between challenging and easy states, and this is why like cold immersion is so great, or different rites of passage is great. It teaches you to regulate your nervous system and face the unknown kind of in that hero's journey. And if we can build that in and understand and trust the process, we can get to that curiosity and to that like this too shall pass spot a lot easier. And you think about like when you're, and you know this from me being younger, like I would fight and like I do not like inaction. I want to go do something. I don't mean like fist fight. Like I just want, like the mistake I would make is jumping. Right. And other people have the mistake of not jumping. Like people are like, no, be good building the airplane without, you know, fly the airplane before you build it or whatever. And you're like, yeah, dude, I'm on like my 4th unbuilt airplane right now.
Yeah.
So like sometimes we need to like
I have a garage full of unbuilt airplanes.
Oh, dude,
I think, man,
that's amazing.
I think you really hit on a lot of things too, because I think both ends of the spectrum, because I'm definitely someone who historically in our relationship at least is like on the other side, you know, like I get analysis paralysis so easy, and you know, just like you know, like one of my favorite animals is the albatross, of like how like once it gets going it'll fly across the world 3 times, but it's like biggest challenge in life is starting. It's like, you know, like getting going. And I think the jumping analogy works because that's like, you know, like if you're, let's just say you're cliff jumping or something, like yeah, there are some problems with like not looking, not checking depth, not seeing tides if they apply or whatever it is, all the factors that can influence a decision, and just jumping, you know, which I feel like is one end of the spectrum. And you know, then the opposite is like, oh, I don't know. And then eventually like the anticipation anxiety ends up being greater than the like a greater obstacle than the task at hand, you know. And that's definitely a challenge with me. And I think I think the most important thing is like, okay, maybe and you kind of touched on it with like the fixed mindset versus growth of like, okay, not so much like, oh, this jump is too high for me. It's, oh, this jump is too high right now, or I don't know how to change a tire, versus I don't know how to change a tire yet.
Yeah.
Like that fundamentally changes a thought process. And there's that 100 teacups concept of like, it doesn't matter. Like you might not ever be the greatest mountain biker, or the most successful executive in business ever, and like it almost doesn't matter, as long as like you just go. And like there's that phrase like, always forward, rarely straight. And like with the teacup thing I touched on, it was like one group was tasked with making the perfect teacup, like all like ceramicists, I forget what college did the study. And then another group of 100 was tasked with, okay, try and make 100 teacups, right? And they're like ceramics. And when it was done, there were people in the group to make the perfect teacup that didn't even make one, right? Like a significant portion. I think it was like almost a third of the group didn't even make one. And then in the group that was trying to make 100 teacups, they made so many, they had so much fun, and they came across with like, people had like, oh, I could pick out 10 favorites that I think are excellent, or that I would submit if there was like we're trying to find the perfect teacup. Do you have any submissions? They're like, yeah, I've got a couple I could give you, and so like kind of having that, like, it's a super simple switch, but and for me in my recent kind of years of learning like how important it is to just go for it. Like, oh, you want to start journaling? I'm not a good writer, I don't know what it is. Doesn't matter, journal. Like, I mean, I think a lot of us too in the digital age suffer from like, someone writes us a really nice email or like a heartfelt text, which kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but like, like so much is improved if you just like an acknowledgement, as opposed to like, oh, I really want to respond to that person, but I want to make sure like the quality of my response reflects the quality that they shared me. And I personally, I don't know how many times I've just let that response go, push it away, not get to it, and then eventually it's like 2 years go by, and it's like, oh man, now that moment's like gone. I can reach out to them again, but it could have just been a like, thank you for your kind words, it means a lot to me, done. And then
Yeah.
maybe a conversation starts, and so it's like, I feel like just putting it out there and just finding that balance between analysis and you know action is everyone's challenge, I think.
Yeah. And
Few
I think,
people do it exceptional.
yeah, and even they have their own unique path, right? Within that, like that's often the perspective of like, I feel like there's a piece like Simon Sinek's work on the infinite game comes here, like to my mind, if like anyone Googles that, or we can put it in the show notes below. Great book, but really just listen to his like hour-long keynotes he's done. It's phenomenal. It's like, it's easy to look at and be like, well, clearly like BT and I are great because we're super contrasting in this part of our decision making and personality. And it's really easy to look at me and say, oh, that's like way cool and awesome, or that's like way detrimental and self-sabotaging. And then to look at it for him, and right, so you can see through both lenses. And I think the wisdom comes for all of us, like understanding both how something is a strength and an asset as well as a weakness. And it's kind of, this comes to like an IFS, like inner reparenting, like who are you let driving your car and when? Like sometimes having the jump off the cliff side is great, and sometimes having the wait on the side of the cliff and be like, hey, like let's let high tide come in is great. Right, and like allowing for those cycles, so that there's really wisdom in both. And I think for people listening, and it's so inherent to our nature to do the comparison thing and to make the judgment of like which one is better, it's like really we want, in my estimation, versatility and mobility between both, and not just a stuck on or stuck off switch. And if you find yourself resonating with like BT or myself more, getting really curious about what those belief structures are. Like, what might you need to believe about yourself, that your text needs to be perfect, or that you need to always be doing something, or that you need to have something figured out or have a certain standard? And what if you don't meet that standard? What does that mean? And I think like the infinite mindset of like, oh, it's an experiment, we're learning, there's no real mistakes as long as we're adapting, these kind of almost Eastern oriented, growth mindset oriented pieces get blocked by the internal belief structure of like, well, I grew up in a family that gave me love and praise when I did things, even if I failed, or I came up within a family that gave me love and praise only when I succeeded, right? And you probably have your own alchemy of that sculpted your personality, and along with genetics and friends and all these other pieces. So I think the more we can step back kind of in the same way of just wandering in the woods, or allow ourselves to go through these things and just take stock of that in a gentle way. It's like, you're not alone in these. It's hard. Like, we don't have the answer. Like, that's the cockiness of youth. Like, we think we know stuff that we don't know. It's tremendously powerful. And I think for me, one of the things I've appreciated is like, when I'm looking at like a BT and you're like, oh man, I wish I was like, would deep dive a little bit more and like take a little bit more time to be thoughtful, right? That doesn't mean that he's better than me. I'm seeing an attribute that he has defined and developed that I have as a weakness. And by seeing that, that means I can change that part of my character. Like, I can, if it's that important to me, and I understand like, the motivation, I can actually take time and start learning of, oh, this is what it feels like when I'm jumping off cliffs. This is what it feels like when I'm thinking something through. And we can start marking and tracking that so that people can, we can use that implementation skill set. And I think that's a lot of what, human development really comes down to. Anyway, nerd
Absolutely.
moments.
Yeah. And I think what's cool is once that kind of, I don't want to call it a dichotomy because it's, we don't live in a binary world, but like once those like kind of attributes are identified within oneself, you can kind of begin to play in both, and by doing that, you're recognizing kind of how to filter goals, or what's another one? I guess goals. I kind of hesitate to use that word, but like, okay, like what is success? What is failure?
Mhm.
Like, can I afford to just really analyze this and really, or is this something where I should just jump? Like, what are the consequences of failure? Is it just a learning experience? Because there's also value to both, of like, no, I'm just gonna, like, I'm on a casual canoeing trip, like, no, I'm gonna charge. I'm just going, like, I'm going hard. I'm gonna get my heart rate going and like paddle and really try, and like all I'm focusing on is like matching strokes and just getting in that kind of singular focus. And then there's plenty to be gained from just like, no, I'm gonna like lily dip and just, kind of slack jawed look at everything and like, oh, what bird was that? Like, what kind of tree is that? Like, was that a fish down there? And and so like, I think because then when you can like play with each of those like kind of, I guess, motivations, I don't, that's probably not the best word, but you can then start being able to like fine tune your approach to things and learn so much more,
Yeah.
and be able to decide when, like, because it isn't just a switch, like it's on and off. It's like I don't know enough about electricity, but it's dynamic, and I think it also helps like one identify like, okay, what am I getting out of this mountain bike, session that I have? Like, what would be success? What is failure? What am I looking for? And you're like, oh, I just want to be outside and have fun. Great. Then it doesn't matter. I'll just go, and it's going to
And
be
I
great.
think that reminds me of like the ski mountaineering days in the Cascades, where it's like, and this is like natural consequences from like a wilderness standpoint. It's great where it's like, cool, like you have rapid sun heating on a snowpack that makes instability and chances of a wet slide highly likely at certain temperature points, typically associated with afternoon. So a lot of people shoot to summit at daybreak or later, depending on aspects and all these other factors and elevation. And if you want to sleep in and feel comfortable and take your time on the skin track, like right on, and feel comfortable that you're probably not going to make the summit, or you will make the summit with a much higher level of exposure. And there's like truly not a right or wrong in that. It's like being super clear and acknowledging. And I think this has helped me, like especially being like a business owner and a dad and doing these other pieces where I've not focused on, like I'm not as good at some things as I used to be, like skiing and mountain biking. And it's not because I don't have time, it's because I'm choosing to value other things. It is more important to me to be engaged with my kid in these ways. And it is more important to me to sleep longer than to get up at 5 to do the thing. Like there is time. I could do those things still. And I'm choosing to do it a different way because of the energy and capacity I have. And I think when we come at it from that standpoint, you're like, yeah, okay, well, now at least I understand why I'm here. And then we can check ourselves and say, like, am I actually okay with the fact that I didn't make the summit? Like, no, well, then you need to get up earlier or get trained to be faster, or yes. And then like, fantastic, like continue down that pathway, and look at the people who are you looking at and emulating. Are you like trying to be the next Alex Honnold? Then probably want to get up early. Right? Are you just trying to like, it's like, are you just trying to like have a great time and like wander around with BT, like looking at deer tracks and finding mushrooms? And like, cool. Also tons of value to getting up early, right? Like there's so much happens in the woods right before sunbreak. I've always been, especially being like a bow hunter, like, and just so much time spent dead silent, sitting still, minimum of 30 minutes before the sunrise. And you're like, oh man, lots going on. Well, I feel like we got to wrap it up for ourselves and for the audience. I'm curious if you were to leave people. I know we've kind of had a fun meandering journey of, through a lot of topics, but I think it's important for people listening to take this knowledge and not just kind of think about it, but also put it into action. So I'm going to put you in the spot a little bit of like, if there's an action you'd like to kind of challenge somebody to do from listening to this talk, what would that be?
It's one that's maybe doesn't seem like it's on par. Like it would be like, build a sailboat and travel, through the San Juan Islands. But I think the challenge I would want to issue would be to start journaling, and start even at 5 sentences. Like you could write 5 sentences, and again, the 100 teacups, it almost doesn't matter. It could be like, hey, my foot's kind of sore, I've got to go to work soon, I'm not that hungry, but boy am I thirsty. Like it sounds inane, but I think if it becomes a practice, a regular practice, like a lot of value comes with tone setting for your day. Like I think ideally in the morning, like wake up, have some water as fast as you can, and then just write 5 sentences down about anything you want. And I think that's been tremendously helpful. And I think it's easy. I think it's attainable. And I think it starts to form, I don't want to say form the future, but it sets the tone for the future. And I think that would be my challenge.
Sweet. Well, I love it. I'm going to leave you all with the challenge. Smash the subscribe button, smash the like button. I mean, honestly, if you made it this far, like, thank you. That's awesome. Share it with some friends. I'm being dorky because you can see this is one of our first videos, but it means a lot that you all are listening. We'll be coming out with this content a lot more frequently, and any comments you leave below, how did that go doing the journaling? That's a super basic, easy exercise with a huge upside for, gain and self-exploration and awareness. Keep coming back, get notified. We're awesome. You're awesome. Yay sports.
Can I add in another challenge?
Yeah.
Use a coin toss to make decisions. Not all of them, not everyone, but you know, assess the risk of like, oh, should we buy this house? I've known some people who have made that decision on a coin toss, but you could also be like, do you want to watch, you know, this Netflix show, or should we just, you know, nerd out to David Attenborough again? Like, if you think you're happy with both options, just flip a coin and see what happens. And a lot of times, I think you find one, I've found that I'll be like, actually, let's do this other thing. I wanted to do that more, it turns out. So yeah, try that. Try flipping a coin to make a decision.
Yeah, I love it. All right, everyone. Talk to you next time.